So, good morning, good evening, and good night, everybody. We are very, very much delighted to welcome all of you to the UNESC Critical Raw Materials in Vulnerable Geographies Impact on Women webinar. This is the March 2023 webinar of a series of awareness webinars that the Women in Resource Management Working Group is advancing to make sure that the key messages about women in resource management are delivered. I am Maria Angela Capello, and I am co-chair of this group with my colleague here, the distinguished Cristina Marras, that is with us in this webinar. I will now provide very short briefing about the group of the EGRM, which is the Expert Group in Resource Management Women Working Group. This is a group that was launched by the EGRM of the UNESC back in 2019 to advance and monitor the current status related to the participation of women and the equity for them in the leadership and activities related to resource management at a global scale. Most importantly, we are advancing SDG 5, of course, gender equality, and SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. In particular, the two indicators of progress that are related to these two SDGs, which are the 5.5, which is there in the slide, and 8.3, which is promote the development-oriented policies that support productive activities, decent job creation, entrepreneurship, creativity, and innovation, and encourage the formalization and growth of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. The EGRM Women in Resource Management Group has also raised the awareness of the pivotal and the key role of women in mining. The photo you have here is from Italy, a country close to my heart because I am Italian and Venezuelan, but Italian is my root. And these are the women working in the mining workshops in Sardinia, Italy. So women have been an integral part of society activities which are related to all the steps in mining: extraction, refining, distributing natural resources, and their awareness about the education opportunities, the financial platforms, and equity frames is needed for women to achieve more. Our group, the UNESC EGRM Group of Women in Resource Management, intends to promote, support, and expand the participation of women in this beautiful story of challenges and successes. Today, we have a fantastic set of webinars for all of us, for all of us to see what is the current status in particularly mining. To finalize this brief awareness, our group is tackling into 4 areas: mining and nuclear, oil and gas, renewables and groundwater, and finally, government and talent development. As you can see today, we are tackling into mining, which is one of our cornerstones of the initiative. So with this, I want to raise your awareness that very soon we are going to launch as the EGRM, the Critical Raw Materials in conference and other initiatives coming in April in Geneva. You are all invited to attend. Make sure that you follow up the UNESC EGRM news about that. And with that, let me introduce today's webinar. We have a fantastic roster of speakers and an outstanding moderator that you will now see. And with this, let me introduce just your moderator for today, who is Alfredo Alvarez Laparte. He is the Energy and Digital Solutions Leader for all Latin America. He's based in Mexico, and he is responsible for the energy sector for the EY consulting firm. With this, and on behalf of Cristina Robinson Marras and myself, I hand over to Alfredo. Thank you and enjoy this webinar.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Nestes, for the opportunity to moderate this panel. Honestly, it's a very interesting topic. Very excited to be part of this initiative, and thank you again for the consideration. We'll try to make the most for the next hour, and we'll try to discuss some of the aspects around the role of women in mining. And the challenges for the mining sector to really evolve in the energy transition that this world needs to keep it warm. At the end, as a way of introduction, mining will have a very significant challenge going ahead, because if everything goes as planned, in 2040, we'll need much more materials and mining products than the ones that are produced today, even though the mines that are producing today will start to extract less products. Then we will need a lot of more mines, a lot of more efforts, and a lot of more human resources to get there. And for that, we will need men and women. Historically, the mining has been one of the sectors that has been more far away from women, I can say. It was even sometimes prohibited for women to really go to a mine in a lot of countries. I am talking about the last century at the beginning. And of course, that has been reflected to be the mining a very only men type of industry. Things has been evolving thanks to a lot of efforts, but still very far away from getting to the place everybody wants to be. I have been seeing some statistics for this webinar, and they are not all consistent. But normally, we can say that in big mines or big mining companies, we see between 10 and 20% of women working, which is a very low percentage. And most of the women working in mining are in administrative positions. Unfortunately, we see very few CEOs and very few board members. We have the honor to have one board member. We'll get there in a minute here, but we'll have very few board members, and we have very few CEOs in the biggest 500 mining companies in the world. We have far less than 10% of the total population in that position. And of course, with all this challenge ahead, we have to see what we should do, and which are the next steps to start evolving and getting better participation of women in the mining industry. Then I will have the honor to moderate this panel. I will first introduce the panel. Let me read very quickly the short bio of each of our participants. Jessica Smith is professor of the Engineering, Design, and Society Department at the Colorado School of Mines in the United States. She is also editor-in-chief of Engineering Studies. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology, International Studies, and Latin American Studies for the Macalester College, summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa, and is a PhD in Anthropology from the University of Michigan. Thank you, Jessica, to be with us. We also have Andrea Woods. Andrea Woods is director of Codelco, the biggest mining copper company, mining company in the world. Also from the Corporación Nacional del Cobre in Chile and the COSECO Center of Studies of Centro de Estudios de Cobre in Chile. And finally, we have Kombada Jenny, which is the National Program Officer from the UNESCO Namibia. based in, of course, Namibia, and a previous manager of the Namibia Geological Survey. Thank you, the three of you, to be here with me, and let's launch this panel. First of all, let me start with the challenge for mining, and maybe let me ask the first question to Alejandra. Alejandra, can you give us a little bit of perspective of what is needed from the mining sector in the view of this energy transition?
Thank you very much, Alfredo, and greetings to everyone. Thank you for this invitation. Well, you were made really good introductions regarding the challenges that this energy transition poses in terms of the demand for natural resources. We know the transition is intensive in natural resources. And well, the southern cone, mainly Chile and Peru, are the main copper producers in the world. And you know, time matters in mining. So as time goes by, our deposits get older and we need to make more mining to use more resources like water, energy. The distances in terms of bringing the minerals out of the deposits are longer, so it gets more expensive, and that is what is going on, especially in our country, in Chile. We in the decades of the 90s, in between the 90s and 2000, we almost quadrupled our production, and with all the positive impacts it brought to our country. And then we were positioned for what was called the super cycle of prices. And of course, that explains the growth, the tremendous growth of Chilean economy. But now we're right in the middle of this paradox in which we know that by the beginning of 2030, we will need at least 2 more millions of tons of copper. And we really don't know where are they coming from, because what we have going on in Chile right now is expansion of brownfields, of large-scale minings that already exist, and those expansions are facing big challenges. I would say in terms of geology, the deposits are going down. It's underground mining with lots of geological challenges and innovation challenges. On the other hand, we have got our sector, the money is not flowing to the sector. Just to keep the rates of production, we need big investments, and as you all well know, money is not necessarily flowing to mining. And I would say that in the bottom, we have the challenge of social license. The world needs more minerals, but at the same time, the world doesn't want more mining. There are the ones that say, the ecological crisis, climate change, and the status of the world today is because extractive industries like mining. And there are the other ones like us, which we say, okay, we need minerals for the future. We need minerals to address climate change. But we have to do mining in a different way, okay? We need to, decarbonize our production. We need to do efficient usage of water. In Chile, we use almost 60% of the water that the sector uses comes from the sea, and we're super efficient in the reusing of water. We also need to address the impacts in our biodiversity, and of course, do secondary mining, repair our tailings and our environmental passives and so forth. And that is why we think it's so crucial to have a very diverse workforce, because it's the only way in which we can address all these challenges we have facing the future. And women here plays an amazing role. In Chile, we're still far behind. We're in between 12 and 15% of the workforce in which we have women, and we have women distributed in, I would say, all of the sort of areas on the mine. It's not just, or not anymore, just in the administrative. So, and this is large scale mining, but we still have challenges ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Alejandra. And of course, that's the reality. The people want things, but the people is not willing to pay for things. And and the mining is a very good example for that. Also, global warming happens exactly the same as sustainability. Combada, from your perspective and maybe from an Africa point of view, what do you believe all this new mining activity that is needed and will happen eventually? Which will be the impact of this mining activity for the society in countries that have the challenges that the African countries has?
Okay, thank you very much, Alfredo. Good day, everyone. Um, in Namibia, I mean, we are, as you know, most of the countries in Africa are very resource rich. So we are at the other end of the spectrum of this mining demand. And in Namibia, most of these discoveries are further away from the known places. So this has had a big impact, especially affecting women and men differently. For instance, you get with these new discoveries and new demand, people having to move to more remote places, and it's affecting families, and you need to provide the social fabric to support these mining activities. And of course, more often than not, it would be the women scientists who will opt to not take this risk and go to remote areas, and then the men would go to these areas. In addition, of course, we have the issue of who is accessing these critical minerals. I mean, in the ideal rosy picture, everybody's getting access to these resources, but sometimes it's just the companies. Do the communities benefit equitably from this? It differs from country to country, but for instance, in Namibia, the government has a major role in making sure that the legislation is there and is suitable not only to the big corporations and the mining companies, but also supports the people who are also emerging and interested in having a stake in this industry. And I think in terms of women's participation in the sector, especially this side of the world, in terms of up to university level, we are on par. It's more or less 50-50, but then we also have this leaky pipe phenomenon, which you see as you go towards the top. And for instance, in Namibia, we have about 25 mines. Some of them are under care and maintenance. And if you look at our Chamber of Mines, in the council, we only have one female senior manager. She's a country resource manager, and then another female leading the exploration council. And most of the female senior managers, you see them in the areas of human resources, corporate social responsibility, you know, the soft areas. But I think we need to have more women representation in the hard geosciences, as in the mineral resource. So we have a long way to go. So it's both positive and negative.
Thank you, Combada. And Jessica, I understand that in the mining sector, we have two very different animals, to say in a way, you know, the very large scale companies, the biggest mining corporations that everybody knows. But you also have, and mainly in undeveloped countries, you also have these low scale or small scale mining that is extremely informal, extremely unhealthy and unsafe normally. And I can imagine that this will make a huge difference for women to work in the two sides of the spectrum and the actual situation of women in the both sides. Can you give us a little bit more perspective on this topic, please?
Thank you, Alfredo, and good day to everyone. I'm happy to be here. You're exactly right. So the coming mineral boom will include both large-scale mining as well as artisanal and small-scale mining, and women's experiences really vary between these two sectors. And I'll complement the previous two presenters by focusing more on women in labor positions. So in terms of large-scale mining, one of the big benefits for women is if they can be employed directly by a company, kind of not through subcontractors, they have access to really excellent wages and benefits. And so most of the large scale mining companies that I'm familiar with, a good entry point is being an equipment operator, typically a haul truck driver. And women can be really recognized for being excellent equipment operators, and oftentimes pay is based on how many pieces of equipment you operate. And so there's more space for gender equity and in terms of pay. And so the really sticking point is making sure that women have access to be trained on multiple different kinds of equipment, and then have support within their crews. In terms of the artisanal and small scale mining sector, it's much more informal, and it is also much less reliable. So women talk about, someday you might have luck, and then other days you might not. That one of the benefits of working in this sector is that it can be easier to balance this kind of mining with household responsibilities. As women who work in both sectors, one of their big challenges is combining this work kind of with their continued responsibilities for care in the home. And studies of women in artisanal and small scale mining really show that there are large differences in participation in parts of Africa and Latin America and Asia, but oftentimes their actual places where they are mining are less safe, both in terms of their physical conditions, but also in terms of gender-based violence. And they, as there's this whole series of intermediaries between the women actually mining and kind of getting the gold to the market, and oftentimes there's discrimination in pay along each of those places. So the women who've been most successful are those who can organize into associations and diversify their livelihoods.
And even though they have those challenges, Jessica, I understand that the percentage of women working in a small scale is significantly bigger than in bigger scale. And that's something interesting, no? Because you will think that normally you will find more women in the more control area, the big minds that care for women and care for equality and
Yeah.
care for blah blah blah. But you find more women in the small scale and in the worst scenario, no? Then that's an interesting point, no?
Yes, you're right. And so in terms of the statistics that I've been able to find, so in some places in Africa, women's participation in artisanal and small scale mining, is as high as 40 or 50% of the people doing this kind of work. In Colombia, where most of my research has been, it's closer to 17%. So there's a lot of variation.
Following to this topic and maybe Combada from your um, Africa perspective, why do you see the woman so involved and interact in the small scale? Which are the factors that are moving the woman to go more for the artisanal than to the large scale?
Well, for my limited scope, I would say it's the formal financing, the banking sector. For instance, in Namibia, out of the banks that we only have two banks that offer some sort of flexible, sustainable financing to people to increase their income and to get engaged in the mining sector. Also, you need to have access to data and the information, which the geological survey sells the data. And if you don't have that startup capital to hire a geoscientist to interpret your data, or to have somebody who is a established registered resource person to evaluate the resources that you have, you cannot go to the bank and start the financing. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. And for instance, in Namibia, you also have the glass ceiling in terms of career. If you're a female geoscientist, then you go to the bank and sell yourself. Your male geoscientist, for whatever reasons, might have a higher chance of convincing the banking manager that they can push the needle forward. So it's kind of complex, and just as Jessica mentioned, also in Namibia, more women are participating in the artisanal small-scale mining, and sometimes the license or the entity is owned by the woman, but then they sub-hire men. So when you go to the site, you
Ah,
mainly find men, but it's owned by the female. So it's that
that's good, no?
ecosystem. Well,
I can
but
imagine
like,
being the owner is
but
good. No?
Yes, but you look at the whole ecosystem, like why are the women more not in the in the formal mining sector? So it's one of those things.
No, no, I kind of understand. No, it's in our brains we have been educated to think that the woman should not be in a mine,
Yes.
and with that, it's hard to bypass that bio that you have in the head. No, but at least yeah, I read that statistic that there is a lot of women owning small scale mining, and in fact, it's I believe a good position to start. No? Alejandra, let me switch a little bit the topic because I know Chile is more like a big mining company landscape. Uh,
Well,
which is
yeah.
sorry,
Oh,
please go ahead.
go ahead. Yeah, in Chile, it's very interesting to listen to my colleagues. In Chile, we have like a large scale mining sector. Then we have a middle size, which in other parts of the world, I'm sure it's like the large size. And then we don't have artisanal mining. We call it like small mining, and it's very well regulated. And I guess it has to do with our history. I mean, we've been doing copper mining since more than 100 years. Used to belong to the American, the Codelco was nationalized on the 70s, 50 years ago. And the state has been really involved, not only in regulation, but also in fiscalization. So I would say we don't have this artisanal, but it's regulated. And I would say that we have the least representation of women in that scale of mining. In the middle size also is less, and of course in the large size where we have the big players, mainly Codelco, which is the main producer, but also BHP, Anglo American, Tech, and all the big ones. They all have gender goals, and we're kind of very advanced in this. I would say, I mean, in the case of Codelco, for example, we have like a diversity policy which not just touches, having all the talent, and as you know, it's distributed in an even way in the population, but also we want to attract and have a representation of different ages. Also, we want to have employed women from the territories in which we have influence. And we're also working in the sensibilization around LGTB plus communities. And we also want to include disabled people. And of course, increase the representation of women, not just in the operation level, but in the supervisory and also in the C-suite level, which is more complicated. We have an example in the case of Codelco, in which we have recently in December, we set a goal that by 2027, we wanted to have 35% of women employed, and that has raised the rate of hiring of women in between November last year and March this year in 70%. And in November, we had 13% women, and now we're almost reaching 15%, which is a very clear example that if you really set your targets, you're able to accomplish, because the talent is out there, not just in the universities, but in the technical schools, in the communities, and everywhere. We have apprenticeship programs and so forth. And I would say that the challenge is not hiring, the challenge is retaining these women in industry. In all the surveys we've done, you can see that women move among different mining companies. In that sense, as different as men, they move until they find the proper job for themselves. And the challenge is, as I say, to retain them and to break this glass ceiling in order to have women in senior roles. In Codelco, for example, in the executive team, it is the first time we have one woman. She is the VP on human resources, and now we have a sustainability VP too. And in the board, we're 8 members, and 3 of them are women. So I would say it's quite a good example that this can be achieved, but we have to address lots of challenges ahead.
Can we go a little bit more, Alejandra, on the challenges? Which are the main challenges to accomplish a woman jumping into the highest positions of the corporations? Which, in your opinion, and maybe we are talking certainly about undeveloped countries, no? Maybe the answer will be different in the US, UK, Australia, but focusing on Latin America, Africa, and I will want to know the perspective of each of you. Which are the main
I,
challenges for
I
a woman
think
to get
that
there?
Yeah, I think there are like different levels of challenges. If you see the trends, of course, there is still like a gender segregation of roles. So I guess in all of the countries, women are still more concentrated in administrative, clerical, and like support services. And also, women, of course, are super underrepresented in the decision making and the leadership roles. And if you survey the C-suite level, it's very amazing how men think that like everything is set to have women in the level. And those are the decision makers. So I wonder how do that goes down to the different levels of each organization in terms of addressing these challenges. No, and also there is this kind of leaky pipeline in which women tend to leave mining jobs in the midst of the career because they have to again share and balance their personal life and all their sort of responsibilities in terms of caring. There is this kind of inequitable parental leave policies in my country, and I know in many of the mining countries in the world, there are still poor facilities are not 100% adapted. There are sexist biased behaviors, gender violence and harassment, and I guess structural inequalities.
Wow. Kabada, something to add from the African perspective to these challenges?
Yes, what Alejandra mentioned, I agree with her. And for instance, of course, in Africa, the problems are at different levels. For instance, in Southern Africa, in Namibia, uh, if you look at our university, if you look at the geological survey where I come from, you will click the tick marks. Women are in leadership. There's more female graduates in the university than male. So you would think you have achieved your targets. But then when you flip the coin and come to the mining and exploration, there's a different picture. And as Alejandra mentioned, I think it's the infrastructure and also the way the work is centered in the mine. Uh, there have been some efforts, but I think maybe we need few more years to really, I mean, even in our parliament, 50% of our parliamentarians are women, but most of them are women beyond childbearing stage. So a person who is no longer picking up their kids or breastfeeding has a different mindset to somebody who's just starting with their children. And what trend that we observe in Namibia, for instance, is that most people start their career in the mining sector when they graduate, and then they get married, and then they come to the geological survey or the mining department because it's a more stable environment to raise your kids. And then once the kids are grown up, then you might go back to the private sector. So I think it's a uh, mining should not only be about looking at equal pay or is there harassment or not. It's more like, is it a family centric? Is it flexible for the women who bear the bulk of the unpaid childcare, and or even if you don't have children, you are most likely to look after your elderly relatives or whatever. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I don't know why the mute got in, but uh, 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 I was saying that, and maybe one of the complexities of mining is that the mines are normally not very close to the big cities or the cities at least, and then it's extremely far away, extremely tough conditions, and that should make things much more complex, no? Yeah. Jessica, from your perspective, what are the things that are stopping we see more CEOs as in the big mining corporations?
I would just underline what the other panelists have said, and I think in terms of large scale mining, there's a really pervasive, I think what an academic would call a social technical divide. So there's this idea that women belong on the social side, and so it's much easier for them to be hired and advanced when it comes to corporate social responsibility or human resources, or even inside of engineering departments. There are far more environmental engineers who are supposed to care about the environment than mining engineers who are imagined to have a different orientation to their work and the world around them. And so I think that is a problem all the way down to the undergraduate level where I teach. And I think another thing we need to remember is that in addition to being remote, a lot of these mines require very odd shift work schedules, even for people in the engineering department. And so if you are a woman who has children and you're trying to work rotating 12-hour shifts, it can be very difficult to find support for childcare, especially if your partner is not available. And in terms of small scale mining, one of the things that I have seen in doing literature reviews in lots of different places, in addition to my own research in Colombia, is that women miners tend to have lower income than male miners, primarily because they're given inferior material to work with. So a lot of times they are given the waste rock that the men have already discarded and that's already been brought up. And then they also receive lower prices kind of for the gold once they start kind of selling it along this chain.
Well, and an open question for any of you to answer. Do you believe that technology and all this technological rush that we are having in this world is helping the woman to get into the mining sector? Jessica, please, you were extremely excited about that question. Then please give me the
Yeah.
answer.
So I started off as a woman in mining. So my job in college, I'm from a coal town in Wyoming. I drove haul trucks, and that's how I became interested in mining as an anthropologist. My dad was a mechanic. And and what was striking to me is that these mines in Wyoming, they had top kind of technology and in terms of the actual equipment that we were operating, and so there was this sense that women could actually be better haul truck drivers, better shovel operators, better scraper operators, because they were very careful with the equipment and they didn't have to have as much physical strength as we might have imagined in other kinds of more historical mining. And so I struggle a little bit with the idea that uh, women are good employees because they care more, because I think everyone should care, and they do. But there is this sense that when you have very advanced equipment, that's a path for women to be integrated in a really successful way.
Alejandra,
Ah,
something to add to that?
yeah, well, I empathize with Jessica on her feeling around this thing about women, being able to sort of care in a better way of, all the equipment. Um, and also related to what Jessica said before in terms of the lack of women in high role positions, CEOs and so forth. I think that the challenges that the mining industry is facing globally, especially towards the energy transition, is demanding like a whole shift of the way in which we do mining. It's like a transformation of the culture of mining too. And I guess I would like to see in the future CEOs that are not, mining engineers and operators looking at the rock and the volumes and productivity solely. I mean, we will have to address sustainability in a serious way, putting it in all of our operational models. And that is really a shift, and that may bring people that have other talents to sort of lead. And I don't see that happening because we just need a change in generation, okay? I mean, in ages and in the people that are actually in the senior positions. And I hope I don't offend anyone, but that's my particular view. And on the other hand, and related to your question, again, in Codelco, we have five remote operating centers we call integrated operation centers, which have really sort of opened the opportunity to incentivize the participation of women. Through these centers, you monitor the operations in real time from far away. They're located in the regional cities or here in the capital of Chile, in Santiago. And if you see the rate of women there, well, in the case of Santiago Remote Center, we have 50% women. In Chuquicamata, which is our biggest and oldest mine, we have 56% of women, and so forth. So regarding your question, yes, of course, digitalization and automation of our operations are going to favor the participation of women because simply because it's different working conditions.
In my case, I will have to say that my wife is far better driver than myself by far. And maybe I totally agree with Jessica on the perspective, but certainly technology is making things easier. No, I believe the the thing that kept away historically the woman from mining is that the work was very tough. No, you really need to be under the mine, carrying rocks, maybe with your hands or pushing a steel car to move rocks around. And nowadays it's easier. No, those centers of remote operations of Codelco and other mines are amazing. No, I just been in one of them, and it's really fantastic. Combada, let me change a little bit the topic and start moving to a little bit of conclusions for the future. But if you had a magic whistle and you were able to ask to your president in Namibia, or maybe more general for all the presidents or governments in the African countries, which is the kind of policy or regulation that we should be seeking to try to help or overcome all these challenges that the women are facing?
Um, I think for me, most of the policy, I mean, most of the policy looks fairly decent. I think it's the interpretation of the policy. One of the things I did not mention is the importance of mentorship and sponsorship. And this is not wishy-washy sponsorship. I mean, real support that, like for instance, for myself, my career, I always had serious mentors. And I know it might sound a bit rose tinted, but mentorship is very important, especially if you are a woman or even a male entering the mining sector. You need that mentorship from expertise. On a policy level, I think policy it's interpreted differently by different companies. So I would just stress the importance of having actual career support and mentorship in the sector, because you can be the most brilliant engineer, but you don't have that strong support or somebody to guide you how to navigate your career depending on your life circumstances. So that would be my magic wand. And if I may put in the second one, it would be just to mention that I know the talk is focused on women and so forth, but for instance, in Africa, I don't know, maybe it's the same in Latin America, we have this discourse on indigenous people and those minorities. So that's another bag. So I think I would say when one is drafting policy or considering the futures of these people, the diversity that you are discussing should be represented on the decision making, because only the people who live their lives can adequately consider all the parameters that might affect them.
Fantastic. Alejandra, from your side, what do you believe we should do to make this better for women?
Well, of course, adding to what my colleague said, I think mentorship is super, super important if for women or men, and especially for women. And if it's coming from another woman, even better. In Chile, currently, there's a big sort of discussion in terms of the parliament around quotas, on boards. And there are many pros and cons, but I think that that is something that it should be looked at. There is one big major player, BHP, which has set a target of having 50% women by 2025. And of course, there is not like nobody obliges them to do that, but I think that, setting harsh targets is always good. I showed the example we did in Codelco and how big the numbers are going. And as I say, the challenge, of course, is to retain these women. And for that, we need more women opening the road and showing the ones that are coming from behind that it is possible. I also think that we need to have more women in STEM careers. It is something that is starting to happen in my country. We have in one of the main universities like a special quota for women, and that is being very interesting. And then we have to go back to schooling. I mean, the education hasn't changed. It's still super biased.
Yeah, and the school, the statistics that I have been seeing, the school seems to be. Can someone, Walter, can you mute yourself, please? What I have been seeing in the statistics is that the statistics for women studying careers focused on mining are percentage more better than the ones that you see already in the mining sector, and in my opinion, that will push the needle for having more women. But of course, the retention is very complex, no, and it's something that we see in EY, for example, an advisor firm. We have exactly the same problem in Latin America. A lot of women in the entering sites of the firm stops. We even have more women than men. But the women tend not to stay too long. For some reason, we lost much more women than men in the process of getting into partners. No? Then it's a big challenge to see what we can make to make the correct conditions. Jessica, which are your thoughts on from your view, and maybe focusing on Colombia and all these artisanal or small scale mining, and what we should do, or what Colombia should do, or even broader?
Thank you. I would underline kind of the comment made by Marian in the chat and Kombata, that there's a real concern that the future production of these critical minerals are going to exacerbate already existing social inequalities in the places that are already very vulnerable. And so the well-being of women really depends on the well-being of these places that host mining activity. And there's a wonderful study that just came out from John Owen and Deanna Kemp and their researchers at the University of Queensland. And they did an overall study of about 5,000 energy transition minerals and metals projects. And what they found was that 69% of them were located on land that was on that was inhabited by indigenous people and by people who depend on the land for a living, like subsistence farmers. And so I think there's a real worry that in trying to meet this demand for clean energy and an energy transition, that we're going to fast track mining projects. And the concern there is that we need to be able to respect best practices for informed consultation and participation. And then in the cases of indigenous and other protected populations, to free, prior, and informed consent. And so really having justice and equity in these places depends on a full understanding of risks, impacts, mitigations, design measures, and benefits really being incorporated into the project as they're being planned. So it's an important opportunity to do this right.
And it's a delicate balance, no? Because at the end, as Alejandra said at the beginning, we will really need the mineral, no? And we have examples, and maybe you are much better in knowledge than myself, but I understand in the U.S. To get a mining permit can be a lifetime challenge for someone. No, I understand that there are some permits that has been holding for 20 years or so. No, then I understand that you have to be delicate with the people owning the land. You have to be conscious about and getting the social license. But at the same time, we need the minerals. No, and then the question is how to get them. No, what do you think about that one?
I've written about this a little bit, and you're right. So I've written a case study of a mine that was able to open in Colorado in the midst of a
Colorado.
very similar political context, but back in the 1960s and 1970s. And then the way they opened it in the midst of a lot of controversy was by inviting ecologists and local community members to sit down with the project designers and engineers and business people and geologists to design a mine that would be as socially and environmentally responsible as possible. And so that's the Henderson mine. And so I think that there is some opportunity to think about if we can enhance procedural justice, so just participation in planning, then we might be able to create projects that are more socially acceptable.
We're really approaching the end of this webinar. We have the last 5 minutes. Then I would love to have final remarks from each of you. Maybe we can start with you, Cabada.
Yeah, I think for me, this has been really insightful talk and discussion. And I can see that all across Latin America and Africa in general, we have similar issues. I would just latch on to the last point about being inclusive, especially for the mining companies from the beginning and not have a knee-jerk reaction later on when you have problems. And I think most communities are open to discussion in the beginning. I think where you get friction is when you have a finished plan and production, and then you want to bring people to do some, how do you say, sellotape remedies. It doesn't work. Most people do understand, even the indigenous communities understand that we need the minerals. And I think it's up to the management and the mining owners to be genuine in their engagement of the community. And people do sense when they're being taken seriously or when they're just being there as an affirmative tick on the box. So if there's more genuine engagement in the beginning, I think we might have less confrontation and they might be surprised by the solutions that the people on the ground have. So that's it for me. And same goes for women, of course.
Thank you, Combada. And Alejandra, which are your final thoughts on all the topics we have discussing about? You're in mute, Alejandra. You seem so inspired, but we are not hearing you then.
Yeah, well, this still happens. It's been such a long time, and we still the your mute thing. It's that change is not happening. No, I was thinking that considering this context of the energy transition, I guess that and bearing in mind that we have the same challenges in Africa or Latin America, all these rich countries rich in resources. I guess it's super fundamental to promote that existing mining operations and the necessary investment to have a major offer of, the critical minerals, adhere to the most higher standards in terms of environment, social, and governance, so that we can count with operations and new projects that are, stable and that really consider and include the new forms of relationship that the communities and societies are demanding. And of course, the representation of women is very important in this context. I think all of our countries have an amazing opportunity, maybe a unique opportunity, and I think it's a transitory one, to take advantage of, this rich resource endowment we have, and we can position these countries as a, reliable source in this context. But we need to do it, as I say, in a different way, and for that we need all the talent that, as I said, is evenly distributed in all of our population.
Fantastic, Alejandro. Thank you very much. Jessica, some final remarks. You will be the last one to talk.
Well, I just couldn't agree more with my distinguished colleagues. I think the more the mining industry can move from a defensive position, which I think we occupy because there's a lot of criticism, but move from that into a more open one that's inclusive and listening. And if we could imagine ways to design mines and operate them that people welcome this kind of development as a part of their definition of having a good life and a good community, the better, instead of designing something and then going out and seeking approval for it later. Thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic, Jessica. With this, I only have to finally thank you for the panel. I really enjoyed the chat and learn a little bit more about the topic. Thank you very much, and thank you to Denise for the invitation, and hope that everybody enjoyed the panel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Bye.
much to everybody. We invite you to our next activities of the UNESC Women in Resource Management Group on behalf of all the organizers of this event, and especially from on the word of Cristina Robinson Marras and myself, Mariangela Capello. We thank your participation. We appreciate the insights and the views of our speakers and our moderator, and we see you on the screen on our next webinar. Bye-bye.